For more analysis, let's bring in CBC News chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton and maybe not David Cochran. Oh, is he there? Is David Cochran there too?
He
slipped away. Okay, so Rosie,
he has a show to do.
Okay, so Rosie, it's all right. I know this is pretty big, right? I mean, you know, I think the last year we have seen some extraordinary moments in Canadian political history. I think, and this might make the top 10, top 5 list. The official signing has taken place. The agreement has been lauded as a critical step towards achieving the shared goal of turning Canada into an energy superpower and building a stronger economy. What more can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge day, both from a policy perspective, what has been put on the table here, and also from a political perspective, and a day where we ultimately still have a lot of questions, I think, about how this will unfold. Let's start with the mechanics that have been announced today. Yes, this is about a new pipeline that would run from Alberta to the West Coast into British Columbia and creating that pipeline under the Major Projects Office. It will be designated a project of national interest. That is important because it will allow the government to greenlight the project no matter what. However, there are a whole bunch of conditions that have been laid out in the agreement that have to start happening as sort of the process gets underway, the first steps of this get underway. One of them, as you just heard the Prime Minister talking about, is the Pathways Alliance, which for people at home is a project that has long been talked about by many energy companies. It's a carbon and capture storage project, which, as you heard from the Prime Minister, would make a significant impact on reducing emissions coming from the oil sands in Alberta. So the pipeline and the Pathways Alliance project have to both sort of be happening at the same time, in tandem. And indeed, if the pipeline doesn't go forward, the Pathways Alliance project also doesn't go forward. That is clearly said in the deal. Alberta has also, in exchange, agreed to accept the industrial carbon pricing plan, bringing that price up to $130 a ton. They will have that agreement in place very quickly. A lot of these timelines are very, very tight, Andrew, which is also kind of a remarkable moment. In exchange, Alberta's clean energy regulations will be immediately suspended. They will not have to follow those regulations set down by the federal government. And as Ottawa had previously suggested in the budget, the cap on emissions will not go forward. So there are commitments here that Alberta has to make in order to advance the Prime Minister's agenda from a climate fighting perspective. But the ultimate reward, of course, is they get the conditions around a pipeline. So they get also potentially a tanker ban or a change to the Tanker Ban Act that was put in place, if that is needed. What Alberta has to do here, though, to get to that point is pretty significant as well. I mean, this was the first big hurdle. You heard the Premier of Alberta say off the top of her comments that 7 of the 9, what she called bad laws, have been dealt with in this agreement, making the conditions for a pipeline much easier. So first, she will have to find a proponent. It is also clear in this deal that it has to be a private proponent. A company or a group of companies have to come up with the cash to make this happen. The much harder part of what Alberta and indeed the federal government to some extent have to do is get British Columbia to accept this idea and get First Nations buy-in through communities that will be affected. That will also come with an economic component. There'll be a financial sort of advantage for those communities and the province if they go ahead with it. But it is very unclear at this time, to me anyway, how they get particularly the BC Premier's agreement. But again, they don't have to get it. You know, I think the Prime Minister was talking a lot about cooperative federalism. That's one way to look at it, but it is not clear at this stage whether everyone's going to cooperate.
Yeah, these are such important and good questions. Yeah. This is a project deemed of national interest, so that is significant. And when you talk about British Columbia, and we are going to hear from David Eby at a news conference later this afternoon, we know that he's not on board with this. His argument has been in the past, Rosie, or certainly in recent weeks, it's just like, there is a Trans Mountain pipeline expansion project that is pushing oil through it. It could push significantly more oil through it, so why don't you do that first? But my understanding of this memorandum of understanding is that this is about another pipeline. It's in addition to the potential of expanding that Trans Mountain pipeline. Is that your understanding? And if that's the case, then I don't know. We'll have to see what he has to say.
Yeah, I mean, his sort of what he was putting on the table as this conversation was ramping up last week was, well, why don't you bring the current Trans Mountain to full capacity, which it is not currently operating. I think it's at about 82 or 83% of capacity. There's all sorts of ways to get oil through the pipeline faster and potentially more efficiently. That's sort of what he was hoping would be on the table. That is not. I mean, that will likely happen, right, because of the company itself. But what is on the table is one or more pipelines to the West Coast through British Columbia with a private proponent. So that, you know, on the face of it, I don't know that will be acceptable to the Premier of British Columbia. But the MOU, the deal, says multiple times that they have to start a trilateral engagement. They have to start talking to British Columbia. You heard Premier Smith say that she spoke to Premier Eby last night, that there were things here that he was willing to work together on, and other things, for instance, the pipeline where he did not have agreement. There is the promise not only of a conversation, but again, as I said, some economic benefits from a new pipeline. There's also mention in the deal of approving more projects of national interest for British Columbia. Currently, that province has 4 that are sort of in the offing, but even more could be considered perhaps by Ottawa if they agree to this. But again, particularly when it comes to the issue of the tanker ban, for people in British Columbia, that is a really fundamental thing for people who live on the West Coast. Not because there aren't oil tankers, there are, but they are limited in terms of size and capacity in order to try and reduce the risk of oil spills. So to have that
and in the coastal waters, right? Sort of in the Northwest. Like this is what we're not talking about in the Lower Mainland, where we know there are tankers, right, that go in and collect that oil and bring it to Asia. But you're talking specifically about a potential new pipeline that would go much further north.
Yeah, and that is of really big importance to people in British Columbia and First Nations there. So the fact that is now on the table, if it is needed, I think would be upsetting and disconcerting to people in that province. But again, the point that you made, that this is a project of national interest, the project itself will have to be fully outlined and sent to the Major Projects Office by July 1st of next year. Again, these timelines are fairly extraordinary. And at that point, the project will be a project of national interest, and that is under Bill C-5, which means that the federal government can exempt whatever regulations or laws are needed in order to get the pipeline built. And of course, from a jurisdictional perspective and a constitutional perspective, the federal government does have the right to build another pipeline and authorize another pipeline. It also, however, constitutionally, is required to consult with Indigenous peoples about that pipeline. So that also is an enormous hurdle, given some of those coastal First Nations who are totally opposed to the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to be speaking with some of those coastal First Nations, as well as other people that are interested in this, who are in favor of it, who are opposed to it. I want to ask you a little bit about the environmental. You talked a little bit about it. It was interesting to hear Mark Carney say, because interestingly, people remember Mark Carney, his first major act as Prime Minister was to get rid of the consumer carbon tax, the price on pollution. That is gone. He says with this deal that Alberta is agreeing to a 6 times increase to the industrial price of carbon, as well as methane reduction down by 75% by 2035 and some others. But I mean, for the Prime Minister, he's touting that, I think, as saying, look, I'm not abandoning the environment or the environmental caucus of the Liberal Party, 20 Liberal MPs, other Liberal MPs and cabinet ministers like Stephen Guilbeault, the former Environment Minister. There is a commitment here to reduce emissions.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way he has to explain it, frankly, from a political perspective, and it'll be up to people to believe to consider whether the trade-off makes sense. But his suggestion, it seems to be, whether it be the industrial carbon price, which, fair enough, is going to be substantially increased at a rate much faster than previously considered, the Pathways Alliance, the carbon capture and storage, the methane regulations, that all of those things combined will make Alberta's oil, according to him and to the Premier, sort of the cleanest and most energy efficient oil on the planet, which will then make it more attractive to lots of nations that have those similar concerns and values that we have, South Korea, Japan, and others. The problem is that he's putting those things on the table at the same time as he's basically saying yes to a pipeline, and let's see how we can get there. And that will be enormously disappointing for some people within the Liberal caucus who saw this party as a progressive party that fights climate change and thought Mr. Carney was very committed to that. He, I think, is trying to make the case today that is still true, that those values remain, but that given the context we are in, particularly in regards to the United States, that this is something that is needed at this moment, and that the other trade-offs make sense from an environmental perspective. There is an enormous, I think, political risk to what the Prime Minister is doing here in terms of his seats in British Columbia, his seats in Quebec, and potentially elsewhere. But there is some benefit. This puts a awfully big squeeze on the Conservative Party, who just yesterday, Andrew, was saying, okay, they're going to sign a deal, but what about a pipeline? Well, that line isn't going to work anymore. And it will be interesting to see how Mr. Poilievre responds, and what that means also for sort of purple conservatives who kind of like some of the things Mr. Carney is putting forward, and including this might be quite amenable to this idea as well. So it's a bit of a tightrope here for the Prime Minister, certainly politically, but he's rolled the dice. He's decided that it is important to have some sort of agreement with Alberta and try and use the economic potential and growth that is available through the oil sands to find economic benefit for Canada. There's a long way to go, of course, before we get there, but this is a big move by the Prime Minister for sure.
Yeah, sure is. It is a fascinating day for this country, I think. We'll see how it all plays out, but Rosie, thank you. CBC News Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton.